Hugo is one of the most overrated movies I've seen in the past several years, just based on its high Rotten Tomatoes rating of 94%, and the fact that I just think the critics basically just kissed this movie's ass because of the fact that it's about the history of film and about the fact that it's, involves George Méliès and everything like that. So, I mean, and just based on how much praise it's getting from the critics in terms of its nominations for Best Picture and in terms of its winning multiple awards, it just seems so unwarranted to me. The story of the movie is basically takes place in the 1920s at a Parisian train station where there's this orphan named Hugo, and that's basically the premise. And the plot doesn't really pick up much from there at all. It almost feels like the movie split in two different movies. Like the first hour or something, and the second hour is completely different. Like the movie in general is just very slow, dull, and boring. The one positive thing I will say is that the visuals are very good. It's shot in sort of an IMAX fashion, so the aspect ratio on your screen is much wider, so it takes up more of your screen. So the movie's shot very well. The cinematography is fine, and the CGI is fine, but unnecessary given the setting and given the time period. It didn't feel necessary at all. Um, the problem I feel here is just the story is so sort of unfocused in that it contains so many unnecessary characters, and the movie wastes like the talent of some of these actors, like the guy who played Count Dooku and the guy who played Harry's uncle in the Harry Potter series, and just like these characters are so one-dimensional and they aren't developed at all throughout the course of the film. And throughout most of the first hour or 70 minutes of the movie, there's hardly anything that goes on. There's no sense of conflict or urgency or peril in anything that goes on. Hugo's basically just trying to find his notebook and trying to basically bring back to life this automaton, which is like a robot, kind of like a machinery type robotic thing that he has because his father ended up dying. There's hardly any backstory about Hugo. There's only about one or two flashbacks. So instead of them focusing on, like these unnecessary romantic moments between some side characters that are one-dimensional, they really should have emphasized Hugo's backstory and developed him more as a character. The only real antagonist, I should say, is Sasha, whatever his name is, the guy from Borat who plays the station inspector, and he delivers a god-awful performance. There's nothing in the least bit menacing or threatening about him. The chase scenes, there's probably two or three of them in the movie. They're just so drawn out and sort of silly just for the sake of it, and they're not funny. His character is just unbearable to watch on screen. It's just, and if only in the final 30 minutes or so did the film become interesting with the whole backstory about Méliès or whatever, and the movie's themes of sort of everything's sort of systematic, and that you have to find your function or whatever in the world, and how everything's part of sort of like a systematic way. I mean, the theme is sort of emphasized just based on its opening shot, where they compare machinery and to the Parisian, like to Paris essentially, to the city. They're comparing machinery type things to the city in the opening shot. So I mean, the movie's themes don't even become apparent until the end, and the whole George Méliès tribute or homage, whatever the hell you pronounce it, to him as a filmmaker just felt sort of out of place at the end. It didn't fit in with what the rest of the movie was doing. Like, the movie just went nowhere for the first hour or so, and it was just so slow, dull, and boring for the most part. Like I said before, the actors are wasted. Most of these characters are just one-dimensional that you don't care about. There's no most of the conflict is internal with George Méliès, with Ben Kingsley's character, but that doesn't even become apparent until like 80 minutes or 90 minutes into the movie. And at that point, you're sort of checked out, or at least I was. I just sort of became disinterested in what was going on. There's just no sense, and like the whole, I didn't even realize that the movie was attributing the art of early cinema until 45 minutes in, where they actually mentioned the word movies, essentially. I don't know, in general, this movie, while visually sort of stunning, and while this positive aspect of the film is unnecessary, I'll give it that. But the story itself just feels unfocused and, emphasizes too many of these unnecessary characters that don't add anything to the plot, don't contribute anything to developing the story whatsoever. There's just a lack of any sort of compelling conflict whatsoever here, and it feels like the movie's split in two. Like the whole second part of the movie just feels like it's like a history lesson of film. And the first movie, or sorry, the first hour of the film just did absolutely nothing, just focused on Hugo running around being chased down by the inspector half the time, and there's no real conflict here. There's nothing to really grab onto. So overall, I just thought this movie was, it wasn't terrible, but it was nowhere near the 94% that it got on Rotten Tomatoes, especially considering how some of the best movies ever made are rated that high. So, like, my favorite movie of all time, I would say, is the first Lord of the Rings movie, The Fellowship of the Ring, and that got a 92%, I believe. And the fact that this movie is 2% ahead of that is just appalling to me, and the reason why, obviously, is just the fact that it tributes, George Méliès in the film, in his early, movies and, the early art of cinema, and it's sort of just like the critics just grabbed onto that movie, I felt, without really paying attention to the actual experience of going to the movie, of this movie. So overall, I just didn't care for it. If you haven't seen this movie, don't buy into all what the critics say, and honestly, just save your money and buy something else.